I stood in front of those tall glass doors, staring at my own reflection. Behind me, the parking lot stretched out like a desert. Rows and rows of expensive cars I'd never be able to afford. In front of me, a young man in a crisp uniform blocked my path with one hand raised. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said, not looking sorry at all. "This is a private office, only family and scheduled appointments." I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. My purse was still on my shoulder, the same worn leather bag I'd carried for 15 years. Inside, it was a Tupperware container of homemade lasagna, Daniel's favorite, the one I used to make every Sunday when he was in college and came home hungry and exhausted. "I am family," I said quietly. He looked me up and down. I saw it in his eyes. The judgment. The old woman in the faded coat didn't match the shining building behind him. "Name?" he asked, pulling out a tablet. "Margaret Lawson." He scrolled, frowned, scrolled again. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the list." That's when I looked up at the building. 20 stories of steel and glass. And there, on the 10th floor, I could see lights on in the corner office. Daniel's office. The one he'd told me about on the phone last Christmas. The last time we'd really spoken. My son had built an empire, and I wasn't on the list. "I'm Margaret, and before I go on, I'd love to know something. Where are you listening from? I always read the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, go ahead and subscribe so I can share more with you. Now, let me take you back to how it all started. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I decided to visit Daniel. I hadn't told him I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise. The kind of surprise mothers dream about, showing up with his favorite meal, seeing his face light up, maybe spending an afternoon together like we used to. I'd taken 2 buses to get there, crossing the city from my small apartment in the old neighborhood to the business district where his company stood like a monument to everything he'd accomplished. I remember looking at that building from across the street before I crossed. Tech Vision Industries, the sign said in silver letters that caught the morning sun. 20 stories of success. My boy had done it. He'd taken that little idea he'd scribbled on a napkin in my kitchen 7 years ago and turned it into something real, something that mattered. I felt proud standing there, even though my feet already hurt from the walk from the bus stop. The lobby was all marble and glass. It smelled like expensive cologne and fresh coffee. Not the kind I made at home, but the fancy kind that comes from machines that cost more than my monthly rent. Young people in sharp suits rushed past me, their shoes clicking on the polished floor. Nobody looked at me. I was just an old woman with a Tupperware container, standing in a world that moved too fast for people like me. That's when I saw the security desk. 3 guards sat behind it, all of them looking official and important. I walked up to the youngest one, the one who'd eventually stop me at the elevator. He had kind eyes, I thought. Surely he'd understand. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'm here to see Daniel Lawson." He looked up from his computer, and I saw his expression shift. Not unkind, but cautious. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" "No, but I'm his mother. Margaret Lawson. I just wanted to surprise him with lunch." The guard glanced at his screen, then at his colleagues. One of them, an older man with gray hair, shook his head slightly. "Mr. Lawson has a very strict policy about unannounced visitors," the young guard said. "Even family needs to be on the approved list." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "The approved list?" "Yes, ma'am, for security reasons." He typed something, waited, then looked back at me with what I can only describe as pity. "I'm sorry, your name isn't here." I stood there for a moment, holding that Tupperware container. Inside, the lasagna was still warm. I'd woken up at 5 in the morning to make it, layering the pasta and cheese and meat sauce the way Daniel loved it. I'd wrapped it carefully in towels to keep it hot during the bus ride. And now I was being told I wasn't on a list. My own son's list. "Could you call him?" I asked quietly. "Just let him know I'm here?" The guard hesitated. I could see he wanted to help, but rules were rules. "Mr. Lawson is in meetings all morning. His assistant handles all his calls." "Then call his assistant." He did. I watched him pick up the phone, dial an extension. Wait. When someone answered, he explained the situation in a low voice. I heard him say my name. Heard him say his mother. There was a long pause, and then his face changed. He hung up slowly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Lawson cannot be disturbed today. His assistant suggests you call to schedule an appointment for another time." The words hit me like a slap. Cannot be disturbed. By his own mother. I looked past the security desk to the elevators, gleaming in silver, leading up to where my son sat in his corner office. So close and yet completely unreachable. "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. "Thank you for trying." I turned and walked back through that lobby, past all those important people with their important lives. When I pushed through the glass doors, the October wind hit my face, and I realized my eyes were burning. I wasn't going to cry. Not there. Not where anyone could see. I sat down on a bench across the street from the building. The Tupperware was still warm in my lap. I just sat there, staring at that silver sign, Tech Vision Industries, and tried to understand when things had changed. When had I become someone who needed an appointment to see my own child? It hadn't always been this way. I thought back to the beginning, to when Daniel was just a boy with big dreams and no money to make them happen. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house back then, the kind with creaky floors and walls so thin you could hear the neighbors argue. His father had left when Daniel was 12, just packed a bag one night and never came back. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. After that, it was just the two of us. I worked double shifts at the diner on Highway 40, coming home with my feet swollen and my back aching, smelling like grease and coffee, but I never complained. Not in front of Daniel. I'd watch him do his homework at our kitchen table under the dim light, and I'd think, this boy is going somewhere. This boy is going to be somebody. He was smart. Not just book smart, though he was that too, but smart in the way he saw the world. He'd fix our old TV when it stopped working, take apart the toaster when it wouldn't heat, figure out how things work just by looking at them. By the time he was 16, he was building computers in our garage, selling them to neighbors to help with bills. "Mom," he told me one night, "I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to make sure you never have to work like this again." I believed him. Even when he didn't get into the fancy colleges he applied to because we couldn't afford the application fees for most of them. Even when he ended up at State University on a partial scholarship, working 3 part-time jobs to cover the rest. Even when he'd come home on breaks looking exhausted, older than his years. I believed in him. I helped however I could. When he needed money for books, I picked up extra shifts. When he needed a quiet place to work on his senior project, I gave him my bedroom and slept on the couch for 3 months. When he graduated and wanted to start his own company instead of taking a safe job at an established firm, I took out a loan against the house, the only thing of value I had left, $25,000. That's what I gave him. It was supposed to be my retirement fund, the small nest egg I'd been building for 15 years. But when he showed me his business plan, eyes shining with possibility, I couldn't say no. He was my investment. My best one. "I'll pay you back, Mom," he promised. "With interest, I swear." "I know you will, baby," I told him. "I believe in you." The first 2 years were hard. He worked out of our garage, just him and 2 friends from college. They'd stay up all night coding, living on ramen and coffee, talking about changing the world. I'd bring them sandwiches, make sure they ate something real, listen to their excited plans even when I didn't understand half of what they were saying. Then things started to change. They got their first client, then another, then a big one. Some company in California that paid them more in one contract than I made in a year. Daniel moved the operation out of the garage and into a real office downtown. Small, just 3 rooms, but it was a start. He still came by every Sunday back then. We'd have dinner together, and he'd tell me everything. The challenges, the victories, the plans for the future. "We're going to make it, Mom," he'd say. "I can feel it." And he did make it. 3 years after starting, he landed a deal with a major tech corporation. Suddenly, Tech Vision was growing faster than any of us could have imagined. He hired more people, moved to a bigger office, then an even bigger one. The local paper did a story about him. "Local boy builds tech empire." I cut it out and put it on my refrigerator, right next to his high school graduation photo. But somewhere in all that success the Sunday dinners stopped. First, he'd called to cancel. Too much work, important meeting, investor dinner. I'm sorry, Mom. Next week for sure. Next week would come and go with another excuse. Eventually, he stopped calling to cancel. He'd just text. Brief messages. Can't make it. Swamped. Then even the texts became less frequent. I tried to understand. He was busy. Building a company takes time, energy, everything you have. I'd read articles about entrepreneurs, how they sacrifice everything for their vision. I told myself it was temporary, that once things settled down, we'd go back to how we were, mother and son, together. I'd call him sometimes, leaving voicemails that went unreturned. I'd text, getting one-word replies days later. For his birthday last year, I made his favorite cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, and drove it to his office. The receptionist took it with a polite smile and promised to give it to him. I never knew if he got it. He never called to say thank you. And now, sitting on this bench across from his towering building, I realized something I'd been avoiding for months. My son hadn't just gotten busy. He'd moved on, moved up. And somehow, in climbing all those floors to his corner office, he'd left me behind on the ground floor where I'd always been. I looked down at the lasagna in my lap. It was getting cold now, the warmth seeping away into the October air, just like everything else. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. Instead, I sat on that bench for over an hour, watching people come and go from Daniel's building. Young professionals with their coffee cups and briefcases, all of them walking with purpose, with somewhere important to be. I wondered if any of them had mothers sitting on benches across the street, holding cold lasagna and broken hearts. Finally, I stood up. My knees cracked. They always did after sitting too long. And I walked back to the bus stop. The ride home felt longer than usual. Every stop a reminder of the distance between my world and Daniel's. When I finally climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, the sun was already setting, painting the old building in shades of orange and shadow. I put the lasagna in the refrigerator, though I knew I wouldn't eat it. It would just sit there, getting harder and drier, until I eventually threw it away, just like this morning's hope. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Daniel used to do his homework, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. That's when I noticed the box. It was on the top shelf of my closet, covered in dust. I hadn't opened it in years, hadn't wanted to. But now, with that cold rejection still fresh in my chest, I pulled it down and set it on the table. Inside were memories, photographs, letters, report cards, little pieces of the life we'd built together. There was Daniel at 6, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing he'd made of our house. Daniel at 12, standing beside me at his father's empty chair at Thanksgiving, trying so hard to be brave. Daniel at 18, graduation cap crooked on his head, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. "I did it, Mom," he'd whispered. "We did it." I found the folder near the bottom of the box. The business plan. The original one he'd shown me 7 years ago, asking for that loan. I opened it slowly, and there, on the first page, was a dedication I'd forgotten about. To Mom, who believed in me when no one else did. "This is for you. This is because of you." My hands trembled as I read through the pages. He'd outlined everything. The vision, the goals, the dreams. And at the very end, in his handwriting, a personal note. 5-year plan. Make Mom proud. 10-year plan. Make sure Mom never has to worry about money again. Final goal. Give Mom the life she gave up for me. I closed the folder and pressed it against my chest. That boy who wrote those words, where had he gone? When had success become more important than the person who made it possible? I sat there in my small kitchen, crying quietly, until the tea went cold and the sky turned completely dark. The next morning, I woke up with a decision already formed in my mind. I wasn't going to just accept this. I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the background of my son's successful life. I'd spent 7 years being patient, being understanding, making excuses for why he was too busy. But that look the security guard gave me, that pity mixed with dismissal, that had changed something in me. I called the company. A cheerful receptionist answered, Tech Vision Industries. How may I direct your call? Daniel Lawson's office, please. May I ask who's calling? His mother. There was a pause. One moment, please. I was transferred, and a woman's voice came on the line. Professional, polished, cold. Mr. Lawson's office. This is Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer. This is Margaret Lawson, Daniel's mother. I'd like to schedule a meeting with my son. Another pause. Mr. Lawson's calendar is quite full for the next several weeks. May I ask what this is regarding? What this is regarding? I almost laughed. I'm his mother. I shouldn't need a reason. Of course, Mrs. Lawson. Her tone didn't change. Let me check his availability. The earliest opening I have is 3 weeks from Thursday, 2:00 p.m. Would that work for you? 3 weeks. 21 days to see my own son. I gripped the phone tighter. That's fine. Put me down. Wonderful. I'll send you a confirmation email. May I have your email address? I gave it to her. The old Hotmail account Daniel had set up for me years ago, the one I barely used. After she hung up, I sat there staring at the phone in my hand, wondering what had happened to us. When had our relationship become something that required scheduling and confirmation emails? But I didn't wait 3 weeks. That same afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Daniel's old college roommate, Mike Chen. Mike had been one of the 3 founders of Tech Vision, one of those boys who'd worked out of my garage eating my sandwiches and dreaming big dreams. He'd left the company 2 years ago, and I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he and Daniel had some kind of falling out. Mrs. Lawson? Mike sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything okay? I don't know, Mike. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Can we meet? We met at a small coffee shop downtown, the kind Daniel would never step foot in anymore. Too ordinary, too simple. Mike looked older than I remembered, tired around the eyes. He hugged me when he saw me, a real hug, and I almost cried right there. I've missed you, he said. How have you been? Honestly, not great. Mike, what happened? Between you and Daniel? He sighed and stirred his coffee for a long time before answering. The company changed him, Mrs. Lawson. Or maybe it just revealed who he always wanted to be. I don't know anymore. Tell me, I said. Please. So he did. He told me about the board meetings where Daniel started talking about optics and image management, about how Daniel hired a PR firm that suggested he refine his personal narrative, about the day Daniel told Mike and Jason, the third co-founder, that they needed to step back from leadership roles because investors wanted a more polished executive team. He pushed us out, Mike said quietly. Jason and me. We built that company with him from nothing, and he just erased us, bought out our shares for less than they were worth, made us sign NDAs. We couldn't even talk about what happened. I felt sick. Why didn't you tell me? I tried calling you, but Daniel had already moved you to a new number. Said it was for your privacy, that you were being bothered by too many people asking for money. I thought maybe it was true, but now I wonder if he was just cutting ties, controlling the narrative like his PR people say. That's when Mike told me the most painful part. 6 months ago, there was a big article in Forbes about Daniel. Self-made tech mogul builds empire from scratch, the headline read. In the interview, Daniel talked about his humble beginnings, his struggles, his determination. But when they asked about family, he said his parents weren't in the picture, said he'd done it alone. I have the article, Mike said, pulling out his phone. I saved it because, I don't know. I guess I couldn't believe it. He showed me. There it was, in black and white. I learned early on that if you want something, you can't wait for anyone to hand it to you. My parents weren't around, so I had to figure everything out myself. That independence, that self-reliance, that's what made me who I am. I read it 3 times. Each time the words hurt more. My parents weren't around. $25,000, double shifts, sleeping on the couch for 3 months, Sunday dinners, homemade lasagna, all of it erased with one sentence. I wasn't absent. I was invisible. Worse, I was inconvenient. Mrs. Lawson? Mike's voice seemed far away. Are you okay? I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Did he really believe that? Or was it just for the article? Mike looked at me with such sadness. I think he's convinced himself it's true. It's easier, you know? The self-made story. The lone genius who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. Investors love that narrative. It's cleaner than the truth. We talked for another hour. Mike told me other things. How Daniel had changed his wardrobe, hired a speaking coach to lose his hometown accent, started attending elite social clubs. How he'd moved from his modest apartment to a penthouse in the most expensive part of the city. How he'd started dating a woman from a prominent family, the kind of woman who'd never set foot in a diner, or know what it meant to work double shifts. He's building a new life, Mike said, and I guess we're all just part of the old one. When I finally left that coffee shop, I felt like I was seeing everything clearly for the first time. This wasn't about being busy. This wasn't about success taking up all his time. This was a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice to leave his past behind. And I was part of that past. I went home and pulled out that Forbes article on my laptop. I read the whole thing, every word. Daniel talked about his vision, his leadership philosophy, his goals for the company. He sounded smart, polished, impressive. He sounded like a stranger. That evening, I made another decision. I wasn't going to wait 3 weeks for that appointment. I wasn't going to let this be swept under the rug, forgotten like a cold lasagna in the back of the fridge. I was going to make him see me, really see me, not as an inconvenience or an old memory, but as the person who made everything possible. I spent the next 2 days doing something I'd never done before. I researched his company, really researched it. I read every article, every press release, every interview. I learned about Tech Vision's upcoming projects, their investor meetings, their public events, and I found something interesting. A charity gala. In 1 week, Tech Vision was hosting a fundraiser for tech education in underprivileged communities. Tickets were $500 each. The event was black tie, held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, and Daniel was the keynote speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son, who'd grown up in poverty, who I'd supported through everything, was now hosting a charity event to help kids like he used to be, and I'd need to pay $500 just to be in the same room as him. I looked at my bank account. I had $800 saved for this month's rent and groceries. If I used $500 for a ticket, I'd have to make some difficult choices. Skip some meals, maybe pick up an extra shift or two at the library where I volunteered. It would be tight, very tight, but I bought the ticket anyway. The woman at the charity office sounded delighted when I called. "Oh, how wonderful. Are you a friend of Mr. Lawson's?" "I'm his mother," I said. Silence. Then, carefully, "I see. Well, we're so pleased you'll be joining us." After I hung up, I sat looking at the confirmation email. 1 ticket to see my own son. $500 to stand in a room with him. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about something else. Something I couldn't quite name yet, but that burned in my chest like a small, steady flame. I went to the thrift store the next day and found a black dress. It wasn't fancy. It had a small stain near the hem that I managed to hide with careful folding, but it was appropriate. I borrowed shoes from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was exactly my size. I watched YouTube videos on how to do elegant makeup, practicing with the old cosmetics I had in my drawer. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I'd say to him, how I'd approach him, whether he'd be angry that I was there or embarrassed, or maybe, and this was the hope I couldn't quite extinguish, maybe he'd be happy to see me. What would you have done in my place? I still ask myself that sometimes. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear. I took a bus downtown, then walked the last 3 blocks because I couldn't afford the cab fare. My feet hurt in Mrs. Chen's shoes, and the October wind cut through my thin dress. But I kept walking. The grand ballroom was lit up like a palace, and expensive cars lined the street, dropping off women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos. I stood at the entrance, holding my printed ticket, suddenly feeling very small and very foolish. The doorman looked at my ticket, then at me, and for a horrible moment I thought he might turn me away, but he nodded and opened the door. "Enjoy your evening, ma'am." Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting light that danced off champagne glasses and diamond jewelry. Everyone looked like they belonged in a magazine. I found a spot near the back, by the bar, where I could see but not be seen. At least, that's what I hoped. The evening began with speeches. Important people stood at the podium, talking about innovation and giving back and building the future. Everyone applauded at the right moments, sipped their champagne, and laughed at jokes I didn't quite understand. And then they announced him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of TechVision Industries, Daniel Lawson. The room erupted in applause. And there he was, my son, walking to the stage in a tuxedo that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. He looked handsome, confident, completely at ease. He looked like he owned the world. And as he began to speak, his voice smooth and practiced, I realized something that made my throat tight. I didn't recognize him at all. Daniel spoke for 20 minutes. His speech was polished, rehearsed, perfect. He talked about the importance of education, about giving opportunities to those who don't have them, about how one person's belief can change a life. The irony cut through me like glass. Here he was, talking about belief and opportunity, while the person who'd believed in him most stood invisible at the back of the room. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood. The woman beside him, tall, blonde, elegant in a way I'd never be, kissed his cheek. His girlfriend, I assumed. Or fiancé. I didn't even know anymore. Didn't know if he was seeing anyone. Didn't know what his life looked like beyond the headlines and press releases. I watched him work the room after his speech. He moved from group to group, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, his smile bright and confident. He was in his element, completely comfortable. This was his world now. These were his people. And I stood there in my thrift store dress and borrowed shoes, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. But I hadn't come this far to hide in the shadows. I'd paid $500, money I needed for rent, to be in this room. I'd spent 7 years waiting patiently for scraps of his attention. Tonight, that was going to end. I took a breath that made my ribs hurt and started walking toward him. He was talking to an older couple, both of them dressed in clothes that screamed wealth. I waited at the edge of their conversation, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, the couple moved away, and I stepped forward. Daniel. He turned, and for just a second, less than a second, I saw recognition flash across his face. Then something else replaced it. Not quite panic, but close. His smile froze in place, professional but distant. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice polite but cool. "Have we met?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Have we met? I felt the room tilt slightly, felt my hands start to shake. Around us, people continued their conversations, oblivious to the small earthquake happening right here in the middle of the ballroom. "It's me," I said quietly. "It's Mom." His jaw tightened. He glanced around quickly, checking who might be watching, who might overhear. Then he took my elbow, not gently, and guided me toward a quiet corner near the coat check. His grip was firm, urgent. When we were away from the crowd, he finally looked at me directly. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, tense. "I came to see you, to talk to you. This isn't the place, Mom. This is a professional event. How did you even—" He stopped, closed his eyes briefly. "Did you buy a ticket?" "Of course I bought a ticket. How else would I get in?" Something crossed his face then. Was it shame? Anger? I couldn't tell anymore. "You shouldn't have done that. You should have called. We could have met somewhere else." "I did call. Your assistant scheduled me for 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks, Daniel. To see my own son. I'm busy, Mom. I've been building a company. Surely you can understand that." "I understand more than you think." I reached into my small purse and pulled out the folded Forbes article. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. "I understand that your parents aren't in the picture. I understand that you did this all alone." He looked at the article, and his face went pale. For a moment, he was quiet. Then, "That was taken out of context." "Was it?" "Because it seems pretty clear to me. You told them we weren't around. You told them you were self-made." "I am self-made, Mom. I built this company from nothing." "From nothing?" My voice cracked. "I gave you $25,000, everything I had. I worked double shifts so you could go to college. I slept on the couch for 3 months so you could have a quiet place to work. That's not nothing, Daniel. People were starting to glance our way. Daniel noticed too. His jaw clenched. Can we please not do this here? Then where? Your office, where I'm not on the approved list? Sunday dinner, which hasn't happened in 2 years? Where exactly should we do this, Daniel? You're making a scene. Good. Maybe that's what it takes to get through to you anymore. The blonde woman appeared then, touching Daniel's arm. Is everything all right, darling? She looked at me with polite confusion, probably wondering who this old woman was, why she was upsetting her boyfriend. Everything's fine, Victoria. Daniel's voice was controlled again, smooth. Just an unexpected guest. I'm his mother, I said, looking directly at Victoria. Margaret Lawson. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. She looked between us, clearly sensing the tension but unsure how to navigate it. Oh, Daniel never mentioned that I existed? I finished for her. No, I'm sure he didn't. Mom, that's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I intended. You want to talk about fair? I tried to visit you last week, at your company. The security guard wouldn't let me in, said I wasn't on the family list. Do you know how that felt? To be told I'm not family by a stranger, while my son sits in his office 20 floors up. Daniel's face flushed. That was a misunderstanding. Security has protocols. Protocols that don't include your own mother. What happened to you, Daniel? When did I become someone you're ashamed of? I'm not ashamed of you. Then why did you tell Forbes your parents weren't around? Why haven't you returned my calls in months? Why do I need an appointment to see you? My voice was rising now, and I didn't care. Why wasn't I on that list? He was quiet for a long moment. Around us, I could feel people watching, though they pretended not to. This was probably going to be gossip tomorrow. Maybe even make some blog or social media post. Daniel Lawson's estranged mother causing a scene at his charity gala. But I was past caring about his image, his optics, his carefully managed narrative. You want the truth? Daniel said finally, his voice low and hard. Fine. The truth is that where I came from doesn't fit the story investors want to hear. They want the brilliant entrepreneur, the visionary leader. They don't want to hear about double-wide trailers and thrift store clothes and... He stopped himself. And mothers who work at diners? I finished. Mothers who smell like grease and coffee? Mothers who aren't polished enough for your new life? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you've decided that the life we had, the life I gave you, isn't good enough anymore. Victoria touched his arm again. Daniel, maybe you should... Stay out of this, Victoria, he snapped. Then softer. Please. She stepped back, hurt flashing across her face. But I barely noticed. All I could see was my son, this stranger in expensive clothes, and the chasm between who he'd been and who he'd become. I have something for you, I said. My voice was calmer now, quiet. I reached into my purse again and pulled out the old business plan, the one with his dedication to me. I held it out to him. Remember this? He looked at the folder but didn't take it. Where did you get that? From the box in my closet. The box with all your childhood memories. Your report cards, your drawings, your letters. I kept everything, Daniel. Every piece of who you were. Who we were together. Mom, open it. Page 1. He took the folder reluctantly. His hands weren't quite steady as he opened it. I watched his eyes move across the dedication page, watched his face change as he read his own words from 7 years ago. Words about making me proud, about giving me the life I'd given up for him. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. You wrote that, I said softly. You believed it. You meant it. So what happened? When did your mother become an inconvenience instead of family? I didn't mean for it to be like this, he whispered. Everything just got so complicated. The board, the investors, the image consultants, they all had opinions about how I should present myself. And somewhere along the way, He stopped, swallowed hard. I guess I forgot what mattered. Or you chose to forget. He didn't deny it. We stood there in that corner of the ballroom, the sound of the gala continuing around us, and for the first time in years, I saw my son. Really saw him. Not the CEO, not the success story, but the scared boy who'd once promised to make me proud. "I'm sorry," he said finally. The words were barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I wanted to hug him, wanted to tell him it was okay, that we could fix this. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because sorry wasn't enough. Not after 2 years of silence. Not after being erased from his story. Not after standing in front of his building with cold lasagna, being told I wasn't family. "You hurt me," I said. "More than your father did when he left, because he was a coward. But you chose this. You looked at what we had and decided it wasn't valuable enough to keep. That's not true, isn't it? You had my number changed. You pushed away the people who built this company with you. You told magazines I wasn't in the picture. Those were choices, Daniel. Deliberate ones." He closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his cheek, and he wiped it away quickly, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. Even now, even in this moment, he was worried about appearances. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Tell me how to fix this." I looked at him for a long moment. "I want you to remember who you are, who you really are under all this." I gestured at the ballroom, the tuxedo, the whole glittering facade. "I want you to decide if this version of yourself is worth losing everyone who knew the real you." "Mom, I'm not on your approved list, Daniel. Your own mother needs an appointment to see you. That's not success. That's not making it. That's just loneliness dressed up in expensive clothes." Victoria appeared again, more hesitant this time. "Daniel, they're about to start the auction. You're supposed to say a few words." He looked between us, torn. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. He was going to choose the gala, the speech, the image, the life that didn't have room for a mother in thrift store dresses. "Go," I said quietly. "You have people waiting. Can we talk after, please?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. Mom, you know where to find me, Daniel. Same place I've always been. Same phone number I've had for 20 years. The one before you changed it without telling me. Same small apartment in the old neighborhood. I'm not hard to find. I've never been the one hiding." I turned and walked toward the exit. My vision was blurry, my chest tight, but I kept my head up. Behind me, I heard him call my name once, softly, but I didn't turn around. I walked through that glittering ballroom, past all those important people, and pushed through the doors into the cold October night. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than before. My feet ached in the borrowed shoes, and the wind cut through my thin dress. But I barely felt it. All I felt was the weight lifting off my shoulders. The weight of hope, maybe. Or the weight of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't cry on the bus ride home. I just stared out the window at the city lights, at all those glowing windows hiding their own stories of family and loss and complicated love. When I finally climbed the stairs to my apartment, I took off the dress, hung it carefully in the closet, and sat down at my kitchen table. The business plan was still in my purse. Daniel had given it back to me without a word. I opened it again, reading his dedication one more time. To Mom, who believed in me when no one else did. I wondered if he remembered writing those words, or if they belonged to a version of himself he'd left behind along with everything else. 3 days passed. No call, no text, nothing. I went about my life, my small, simple life that Daniel had apparently decided didn't fit his narrative. I volunteered at the library. I had coffee with Mrs. Chen. I made lasagna and ate it alone, one forkful at a time until it was gone. On the 4th day, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there. No tuxedo this time. Just jeans and a sweater I'd bought him 5 years ago, worn and faded. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without a word. He walked into my small apartment, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe seeing it clearly for the first time in years. "I've been sitting in my car downstairs for an hour," he said, "trying to figure out what to say, how to make this right. And I realized there's no perfect speech, no polished way to say this." He turned to face me. I was wrong. About everything. About what mattered. About who I wanted to be. I thought success meant leaving the past behind, but I was just running away from the parts of myself I was ashamed of. You were never something to be ashamed of, I said quietly. We were never something to be ashamed of. I know that now. Or maybe I always knew it, and I just didn't want to admit it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I fired the PR firm, the one that told me to refine my narrative. I called Forbes and asked them to print a correction. And I changed my approved visitor list at the office. Your name is at the top now, right where it should have been all along. It was a start, a small one, but it was something. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, he continued. I know I have a lot to make up for, years of it, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw both the man he'd become and the boy he used to be. They were both there, fighting for space. And maybe, just maybe, there was room for both. Sunday dinner, I said. Every week. No excuses, no cancellations, no, I'll text you later. You sit at this table, and we eat together, and we talk. That's where we start. Okay, he said, his voice thick. Okay, I promise. And Daniel? I waited until he met my eyes. Don't ever lie about who you are or where you came from again. Not in magazines, not to investors, not to anyone. Because the truth is, we're not something to hide. We're the reason you succeeded in the first place. He nodded, unable to speak. Then, finally, he crossed the small kitchen and hugged me. Really hugged me, the way he used to when he was young, and I was the only person in the world he needed. And I hugged him back, feeling all the anger and hurt and love tangled up together in my chest. We stood there for a long time in my small apartment, the one he'd once been ashamed of, the one that represented everything he thought he needed to leave behind. And maybe we both realized that coming home isn't about the place. It's about remembering who you are and who loved you first. Have you ever been through something like this? Tell me in the comments. I always read everyone. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe so I can share more with you. Sometimes forgiveness comes when we're brave enough to face the truth. And sometimes the longest journey isn't to success. It's back to the people who believed in us all along.